I cannot therefore continue to be in a government which continues to look down against health workers. We are the only profession in this country that has been neglected. We are the only ones who fight and cry for salaries.
This is a call that tomorrow and today we are advising the healthcare workers in those particular counties that they do referrals and they discharge those patients to other nearby counties that have paid healthcare workers.
The plight of county workers, particularly those in the health sector. I remember the KMPDU Secretary General, whom you've just heard from there, initially saying, this is not a strike notice. We're just simply informing, our employer that we can't go to work. We have no money to go to work. We haven't been paid. Unlike, a strike notice where you've got issues at hand, like a CBA, agreement and that sort of thing. And this just continues from where we were last week, with the cash crunch in the government and paying county workers. Now it is the health workers, who are feeling the pinch. Jamila, it is today the 20th of April. We are well into the next month. In the course of next week, these and other civil servants should be expecting their salary for April. But have all of the civil servants been paid, in fact, for March? That's still a problem, isn't it?
It's still a problem. You remember when we were here last week, we talked about how the counties had only received the money that they were supposed to have been given in December a couple of weeks ago. In fact, Gituku and I were asking each other, pesa za January zimeingia? We're not sure whether the January monies have been received in the counties. Remember, we are February, March, and April. And we talked about how governors were forced to take loans to be able to pay salaries. And then now, this crisis in the health sector. Of course, health is a devolved function. Some governors in some counties have tried to get loans and pay their health workers. But Nyamira, Kisumu, Bomet, and Vihiga counties are now witnessing day 2 of a grim situation in public health hospitals in those counties. We went to some of those wards in the hospitals in Kisumu, in Nyamira, in Bomet and Vihiga. And in their instances, Yvonne, where patients are being left to fend for themselves. Patients who are in wards are being left to their own devices. You see relatives trying to now kuwahudumia, kuwasaidia, because this is someone who has had surgery done. There was a lady who was talking about she had surgery in her stomach. She has not seen anyone coming to take care of her since morning. Her relatives are the ones who are left there to try and help her out, Yvonne. And just in those 4 counties. And they're left in a crossfire, poor patients, between the health workers unions on one side and the county governments on the other. But of course, Yvonne, to some extent, tunaweza kusema woye, si wawasaidie. Si waende tu wasaidie wagonjwa. But they're telling you, hata pesa za kukuja kazini sina, sijalipwa muda mrefu. In fact, I think we need to listen to Unga, the chair of the Council of Governors and the governor of Kirinyaga, talking about how they are struggling to cope.
Every month you have to pay salaries, you have to buy drugs, you have to keep your vehicles running. As a matter of fact, some of us are grounding some vehicles, keeping them aside so that we can only use the ones that are for critical services to be able to keep afloat.
Unga is speaking on behalf of governors in all the counties. That is the situation they're facing. Those who've been able to get loans, well and good. They have gotten loans. They've made some payments. But as we said, it's not all the payments. Remember, Gituku, you have SACCO loans. You have a standing order that is supposed to be paid every month. And for the past 4 months, you've not been able to pay that. Umekuwa una default. So hata kama pesa zikiingia, huwezi pata zile zote wanahitaji, so you're able to pay off all this. And number 2, we had the minister, the CS for Health, talking about this and appealing to these workers, telling them, well, please come back. We want to have dialogue, go to work as we talk. But Yvonne, we've had this go back to work as we talk business going on for a while. Even before this issue that we're seeing, county workers have been on strike several times. Why? Wanasema agreements that we made were never honored. We've asked for monies that were supposed to be paid and were never paid. Tumebembelezana, hakuna mtu anatusikiza. That's when unasikia strike imefanyika and they down their tools. Let's listen to CS Susan Nahumicha appealing to health workers to go back to work.
Otherwise, we'll continue speaking to them. And the health workers, the doctors, they are not foreigners in this country. They live in this country. His Excellency the President has said, as a country, we are in a bad state in terms of the economy. So it's for them to allow discussions to continue and for the President to steer the country towards economic recovery so that then some of these issues can be taken care of.
Thank you.
That is well and good, but you're not going to tell a health worker who has not gotten paid to go back to work. Hawezi kurudi.
Yeah.
And I know the government is in a difficult situation. All these loans are maturing, and they have to start kukaza mkanda, in some essence, reduce spending so they're able to make these payments. But as we're looking at things now, the situation right now is that public hospitals in 4 of these counties are in a dire state. And most of these people who are going to the hospital say they're unable to afford going to a private one. What aside you, VP?
Yeah. And you know, she also did say that, you know, health is devolved. You know, and of course the plight of the county health workers is a matter for the county governments, but you know, there's also money from the national government to the counties that is delayed. And so this is not just a situation for the county workers. Sam, have all civil servants, maybe even at the national level, been paid? There are still delays.
Right. I wish I had a very authoritative answer to that, but based on the...
Probably more authoritative than the rest of us, because you covered this story.
Based on the information we have is that as of 7 days ago, which is 13th of April 2020, there are several agencies that were yet to pay their salaries because they had not received the exchequer releases. You're talking about, they were owed about 13.7 billion shillings. These are departments that you find at the Kenya Revenue Authority. You can imagine that these are the people that collect the money. Of course, they are a saga under the National Treasury. They had not received some 1.7 billion shillings. You find the National Service was yet to receive some 845 million shillings meant for salaries. The Teacher Service Commission was yet to receive 8 billion shillings meant for salaries. But the teachers may not have felt this pain because probably the Teacher Service Commission went ahead to take loans from commercial banks to be in a position to clear the payroll. But this is money that as of 13th of April 2023 had not been sent to them. The other thing that you know is that for the better part of this month, the explanation has been coming from the officers of government, talking about Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua and the President saying that, it is because there are so many bills that have to be paid, there are debts that have to be paid, and as of the current financial year, there's a plan to service debts by up to 1.36 trillion shillings. But as of April 2023, some 843 billion shillings had been paid, and much of that was actually paid in the month of January, which 132 billion shillings is what was paid. In the month of March this year, 121 billion shillings was paid. And this is the same month that we had challenges of the government paying the public service salaries. But then also you reflect on the revenues that are being collected. You recall that last week there was a statement from the Kenya Revenue Authority indicating that 93% of the target had been achieved. They were putting it at 1.5 trillion shillings. But the figures that we have indicate that as of March this year, some 1.3 trillion shillings had been collected, and also there was some non-tax revenue that came to about 50.7 billion shillings. So even you look at all the plans that the government has been implementing, they have to borrow to meet certain needs, especially to probably clear some of the debts that are falling due, or the interest that was falling due. Just that space of cash flow management that we were asking the other time, we were asking the question of, if you knew that this was going to happen, why then not manage it in a more prudent manner so that it is not getting yourselves to mid-April, you're yet to submit the resources for that particular, for the previous month actually, to the various departments. But also, as to the question of counties receiving their resources, yes, January they were supposed to receive 31.45 billion shillings. There was information that the Treasury is making plans to make sure that it's able to clear that before the end of the week. I don't know what happens, knowing that tomorrow is a public holiday, but there's also a plan to ensure that they try and catch up with delays, the backlog, if you may call it so. But also listening to the Cabinet Secretary, I know she's saying what is true, that health is devolved, that you're appealing to medical workers that they're Kenyans, and indeed they are. They're not foreigners. They know what is going on in this country. But I wish the Cabinet Secretary was using her time to champion the interests of these healthcare workers and the counties to the national treasury, because if the challenges of paying these salaries and allowances because the resources have not been disbursed, then there's something she can do to either call the national treasury or figure out what to do with it.
Indeed, and you know, this is the tough thing, because it seems like the problems compound, and not just for the civil servants and the county workers, but you know, for all Kenyans. So you've got the cash crunch, you've got some civil servants who are yet to be paid. They have to contend with, you know, no salaries or delayed salaries, and then they have to go to the shops and look for unga, and the price of that is a matter of contestation. You know, sadly, even with something like that, it's depends on which side you sit politically. I remember I did that on my take, that in this country, we cannot seem to agree on what the price of unga is. But that also depends on which side of the political divide you support. You know, for those who support one side, they will say this is the unga that's available. It's available at this price. The price has gone down. There's others who say, well, you know, the cost of that is still up. Linas, you know, here we are again with the declaration that yes, there's been reduction in prices. It's been on some brands, and there's also been questions about the quality of some of that flour, you know, its shelf life. So here we are again, compounded with yet another issue of the price of a very basic staple in the country.
Yes, absolutely. And it's good. It's coming as good news that indeed there is unga whose prices is way below 200, 230. Now we're dealing with, I think, 159 that we saw in Gatete and Njoroge's story. Some of the new brands coming in. But the CS Agriculture sat here on Tuesday night with Wahiga. And clearly there's still a lot of explaining to be done to Kenyans in terms of the reliability of what we are seeing, because at the time the CS spoke here, only one miller was bringing in this unga. Clearly, you can't have a country that is so maize mill dependent, served by a narrow space of only one miller. So I think this is an evolving situation. There's a lot of wait and see how the government handles this, how it will actually source unga in a way that will actually reflect properly on the shelves of the supermarkets that the price has changed. Because as recently as today, you still had these other brands that were retailing at what we would call normal prices, so little has changed. So there'll be those who will feel that the changes are very, very cosmetic. There are those who are questioning why should the brands be completely strange to the market. You know, they're very, very new. We thought you are reducing the prices of existing brands of unga. So this is a moving situation, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, and it's also about the millers, isn't it? Because, you know, when you talk about brands, it's also, you know, from certain millers.
Right, and, you know, I was having a conversation with the Gatete and Njoroge, and you get to the point that it's just about maybe two millers that have so far received the duty-free imports. Because remember, the government gazetted or allowed the importation of 1.4 million 1.4 million tons of duty-free maize and 1.1 million tons of duty-free rice. But as we speak, very little has come in. So even if there are some brands that the price has gone down, it may not be for long, because once the stock they have that is duty-free is extinguished, then they cannot continue to offer the same product at the same price. But also, if you look at the other brands that Kenyans are used to, the kawaida ones, they are not changing. It means there must be challenges that these importers are having, or these millers are having, stopping them from accessing it. And some of them have explained and said that, you see, we were not paid the subsidy, the maize subsidy that was under the President Uhuru Kenyatta regime. So they're saying that they are short of cash for them to go ahead and import that. But also others are saying that there has been a challenge with accessing the commodity in the global market. So that may explain why there's a problem. But I'm also concerned, why are we so fast to go to the market or to go to the public and tell them the price of Unga has come down? If it happens, they will know, because they have shops where they buy that Unga.
Right.
And then you also have to think about it. If you are an investor and there's a communication that the price of Unga has gone down, yet you have in your stocks maize flour that is from maize that you bought at a higher price, probably locally, or even if you imported on duty, what are we supposed to do with it? So there's a bit of what I would call interference with the market dynamics, because certain things are left to demand and supply. But if indeed the government has information that there are millers that have received maize from outside the country, duty-free, but they're selling it at a cost that is also inclusive, that does not take care of the import duty, then I would imagine that's a crime. And the cabinet secretary was here and saying that that's unethical, it's a criminal offense, and action would be taken. But so far, there's no evidence that that has happened. I was doing some calculations and saying that 1.4 million tons of maize imports, that would translate to about 4.6, what is that? 4.6
billion?
Million 2-kilogram bags of maize flour. And that is a demand for about 4.5 months. Remember, our demand as a country is about 40 million bags. If you convert that, then you get to about a lot, which I'll be giving you shortly. But essentially, looking at this, it's a bit of work that has to be done, and it will be interesting to see how then it moves forward, especially in containing that. Again, a conversation you hear from the millers, they're telling you that for every 90-kilogram bag of maize that they receive, it's only 80% of that converts into maize flour. So you're talking about 72 kilograms of maize flour from 90 kilograms of maize. So you have to also factor that on what that translates into. But you have to wait and see how soon the millers can access.
You know, and even on the same thing, sorry, Gituku just talked about why we should announce that the prices have gone down. Why not let people find out? Because when you make such an announcement and say bei imeshuka, people rush to go to the supermarkets to buy unga ambayo imepungua bei. And when we did the story, you hear people say, nilienda lakini sikupata. Because the expectation is all the unga, the one that I usually use, the brand that I like, bei imeshuka. So when you go to the supermarket and find that it's the same price that it was last week when I went to buy it and I couldn't because it was too high, there's that disappointment that comes in. And then you find a different brand that you're not used to that is iko bei ya chini. And you say, this one sijawahi tumia. It's the same thing when you hear that bei ya mafuta inaenda kupanda. We all rush to the petrol stations. We all queue there tukitaka kujaza tank because you're worried about bei itapanda. Let me save the little that I can. So I think we should just let people find out for themselves kama bei imepungua. Instead of raising expectation in people's hearts and minds that bei imeshuka, what we had hoped for has happened when it hasn't really happened the way maybe they were expecting it to.
And it really shouldn't be a matter of debate. I mean, you know, it's either gone down or it hasn't. It's either for all brands or not. But, you know, one of the things that is very that determines the price of maize flour. Just in February this year, the Cereal Millers Association issued a statement, and it's with regards to the subsidies that were issued last year. Now, they say that under that subsidy program, under the previous administration, they sold maize flour worth over 4 billion, right? They were paid about half of that, leaving an outstanding, actually less than half of that, leaving an outstanding of 2.5 billion shillings that they need to be paid. And they've been, you know, having talks with Treasury to pay that outstanding amount because they say that is what will enable them to buy adequate quantities of the raw material, which is the maize, to be able to mill it into the flour. I know this current administration's thoughts around subsidies and whether those are sustainable or not. That being said, this was an agreement that was reached by the previous administration, but it's still the government of Kenya, right, which they are now in charge of. So if the millers are saying, hey, you know, there's some 2.5 billion shillings that we are owed, and without that, we can't continue to do this, then it's something to think about. And remember, the millers have been put in this position not just this time, but before that. Remember, the price of unga is always an issue just before an election. The millers are then always called upon to come to the rescue of the government in terms of food security. Supply us this maize at this subsidized rate and we will pay you this amount of money. So this for them, by the way, is not the first time that they're complaining about unpaid subsidies. From word that I've heard, they were actually not perhaps as enthusiastic to get into this deal as they were, because they've been burnt before. So these are some of the issues to think about. They are, cash crunched by a deal that was made by a government. And so whoever comes in, you assume all the liabilities as well of the government. But there's also one thing to note. So this spending money to them aside is also the issue that we may not produce enough maize, to produce the maize flour. This current rainy season, we have been told, will not be optimum. It will be depressed, which means, some of the maize that we produce won't be sufficient. Now, I know we've talked about imports of maize flour that the president has promised that will then, fill that gap. But the issue of unga prices is something that is much broader than what we're seeing at this point, and it'll take time for us to resolve that. I know there's also the subsidized fertilizer that is supposed to help increase our productivity, but that will take some time, perhaps this season, and perhaps maybe the next as well. And so just something to think about. These maize millers keep complaining that money is owed to us by the government, and yet we step in. So the price of unga is determined by many factors, and those must be put into consideration. It's not something that'll happen overnight, and there's some issues that need to be addressed.
Absolutely, and one of the other key issues that needs to be addressed is how did we get here in the first place? Maize is something that for all our lifetime, Kenya has been very self-reliant on. But then, now tonight we speak of maize millers as our saviors. Or protect, heavens protect our maize millers. They had better be in good health and protect the sheep that they are bringing the next consignment with.
Yeah.
How did we get here for a country that used to be very self-reliant on matters maize?
Yeah.
We got here because maize, just like sugarcane, or rather sugar, became sort of a training ground for corruption. Maize importation has created a lot of millionaires in this country. People who move from zero to millions overnight because of being connected to supply the National Cereals Board with some maize here and there. We got here because the farmer lost the game to the broker, who then became the new biggest supplier. How can an importer be the biggest supplier of maize in a maize-producing area? And we have very specific areas where we produce maize in this country, like the North Rift, South Rift, where I come from. There was a time Kilgoris was one of the leading producers of maize. But you find ourselves now relying on imported maize because our politics moved us into that direction. Why do we have perennial problems with the sugarcane industry? It's because we are not willing to fix that. Because you fix the local market, you empower the farmer, that will definitely affect the cartels. Let's use the word cartels because they do exist. They make their riches through importation of maize, make their riches through importation of sugar, and then they go to they get access to political power, and then it becomes so the farmer becomes the biggest loser in this whole thing. If the farmer had remained powerful, able to produce, able to supply our stores across the country, we absolutely have no business of being in this very lowly position of hoping that Zambia can give us some garden to still for us to get maize.
Yeah.
It's a very shameful space to be. It's a very unnecessary place to be. And for a country that has been blessed with fairly good weather conditions for the production of maize, this is not something complicated. Maize, very, very simple to produce. We should be reflecting. And I don't know, to put it lightly, I hope it's one of the long-term issues, one of the Agenda 4 items, when these guys meet to think about the future of the country.
Yeah, and just to add on to what you've been saying, it's about the cost of production for the farmer and the price at which the government is willing to buy that maize from the farmer. There has been constant debate about that, with farmers saying, that the amount that it costs for them to produce that 90-kilogram bag versus what the government is willing to pay for it is, a big thing. But then what always happens is the farmer always gets, the lowest end of the stick. Then you will have the millers, you'll have distributors, you'll have retailers, you'll have transporters, all of these that then come in and add on to the eventual cost. But farmers have constantly been saying that, look, this is how much it costs for us to produce a bag of maize. This is how much the government has been willing to buy. And at times like these, government always tells the farmers, release the maize you have, release the maize, before we begin to bring, the imports. I mean, I think we saw this even earlier this year, where they were being told, release what maize you have, before the import window begins. But they say, look, the value versus the work that we've put in. I know we're talking about supplementing the inputs and subsidizing the cost of that. But, fertilizer is key, but it is not the only input that goes into, the production of maize and other crops in the country. So there's also those issues. I mean, farmers are a very frustrated lot, and they will tell you, just how difficult it is for them to produce the food that they do and then get very low prices, sometimes even making losses with the maize flour they produce. And so if we don't address these issues, then at the end of the day, the consumer at the other end who's saying, and maybe rightfully so, we want Unga at 100 shillings for a 2-kilogram packet. But then there's the farmer on the other end who says, well, that's not going to happen with the cost of production, the way it is.
Look, it should be said, the Kenyan farmer has been most unfairly treated. We not only treat our farmers unfairly, we also talk to them in a very condescending way. We don't... And we're yet to get an administration that can actually place the farmer at the center of the food security strategy. A function, I mean, when you go importing maize from Zambia and even Zimbabwe, what do you think they got right? They just got right their farming strategy. The farmer there has been allowed and has been empowered to actually produce and make sure that the channel between the farm to the market is very clear for him and very smooth, and for her as well. This is the problem with us right now. Our farmers are an unhappy lot. Do we even have younger people now going into farming? Because
why would they?
Why would they? Because they think it's a suffering space.
And they see their parents and the older generation struggling.
And they just need to look at television pictures. A few years ago, even when we were producing a lot of maize, do you remember there was no market for that maize? Yes. Do you remember in Eldoret, our grain basket, people sleeping in those long queues for days to get a place to dump their maize at cheaper prices. I think we need to have a very, very honest conversation about how we treat the farmer. And for me, I think the issue is the broker has always been more powerful than the farmer. As long as we still want to leave a line for well-connected individuals to import stuff, we will not treat our farmers well. We will not allow them to produce enough maize because we still need to maintain that need, the need that will be filled by brokers, cartels, and well-connected individuals who will import maize, who will import sugar. So the farmer is still very much below when it comes to the food security strategy.
Yeah, you know, in 2018? Yes. The then Agriculture Minister, Mwangi Kiunjuri, was saying he was promising that a 2-kilogram maize flour packet would be 75 shillings. The farmers were up in arms because for them, it was for that to happen, they would need to be paid a certain amount for the maize that they produce. And so there's always been, and like you say, this promise by administration after administration to peg a price on that maize flour packet and to look at the consumer end of things, which is important, but the farmers have always felt like you deal with the consumer side, but not necessarily with the production side.
And Yvonne, we talked about this last week when we were saying what the government was going through, there's no money. Some of the quick mid-term or short-term wins would be in agriculture, where you make sure that people have enough food, because there's some things that you cannot do anything about at this point in time, because of the situation we find ourselves in as a country. But now look at the farmers, look at agriculture. You do not, you have very few people who actually get very rich practicing agriculture. I think that's partly why you don't have younger people going into it, because of what they see. But then now investing in that, watu wapate pembejeo za kilimo, waweze kupata them easy, keep the promises, you know, because already the fertilizer that the government has promised, and which is being summarized to farmers, those who are getting it are saying this is not what we wanted, because we need to change this or that's for us to be able to use it in our farms. Na kuna wale ambao wanasema mimi hiyo fertilizer mnasema sijaona mpaka saizi. I think we need to give agriculture a bit more time, a bit more effort, because as I said, it's one of the things that would be the quick wins. Hatutaki watu wakose chakula.
But yet, Jamila, they've had their budget reduced by 12% in the coming financial year, 2023-2024. Sam, do you have one last thing to say? A sentence.
Right. We must not forget that it is not just unga that is expensive. Have you checked the price of a bar of soap?
Yeah.
Have you checked the price of sugar?
Salt?
Salt has gone up.
Have you checked the price? Cooking oil?
Yeah.
Margarine?
Yeah.
They're basics.
Yeah.
Expensive. So duty-free imports for maize and rice. How about soap?
Let me tell you, when you see the price of salt going up, just know that's it, because salt is usually the most affordable.